You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Welcome back to Crimson Cast. Galen Clavios, Scott Caulfield joining you. It is the 27th of October of the year 2024. And Scott, Indiana's 8-0.
We made our prediction. We're there.
Yeah, we made it. Shut her down.
Crazy now.
Oh, that's right. Indiana, big win yesterday as they defeat the Washington Huskies at home, 31-17. We are going to dive deeply into that game, and we're going to break down everything. We're going to break down College GameDay being here. It was a crazy last few days in Bloomington, and it was one of those experiences when you're there, you'll remember it for the rest of your life. And whether you were a freshman in college, with this being your first experience like this, or whether you were in your 80s, as some people were that I talked to around the College GameDay set, where they'd never really seen anything like this before, it was a truly special weekend in Bloomington. Scott, good to see you. Good to have you back. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. We landed, our flight got in Friday, Saturday morning at 1 a.m. We landed at like midnight. I will just say this. I know I said I wasn't going to tell travel stories. On the flight back, this was a new one for me. I've done a lot of traveling. We're flying back from Baltimore to Indy. My two sons are completely zonked out. We're hoping for a nice, quiet flight home. My oldest is he's like walking a drunk guy through the airport. He's like half asleep, half walking. The plane was full, but let me tell you, there was 9 civilians on the plane, of which me and my family were 4. The rest of the plane, Galen, was a middle school Zionsville East trip coming back from DC. So like 195 middle school kids. And it's just like, this was not the quiet flight that I wanted. There was like maybe 6 chaperones. We come on, like all the rest of us are in the first 2.5 rows. And the stewardess is like, what's, and like, then they start flooding in. She's just like, oh my God, it never ends. Like, we're on the tarmac. She asked 5 times people to sit down. She's like, I'll turn this plane around. It was wild. And then it never ended, because then we go, like, I go to just get my kids in the car, and I'm like, I'm going to pull the car around to pick up the bags. But, I forgot, with a plane of 195 people, 193 of them can't drive. So there's cars. It was the gift that kept on giving. But I got home at 1:15, tried to go to bed. It was not hard. I was exhausted. And then woke up at 6:30 the next day, got my son up, and he was like, let's go. It took him a little bit of rousing, but he was ready to go. Picked up a friend, Matt, and his son, drove down. We got there early. We were parked by 8:45, and it was awesome. I mean, it was worth I was tired on the drive home, but it was worth it. I'm so happy I made it down. And it was a great experience. Like you said, it was something else. We got there right when game day started. And they had their power outage. We saw the opening of game. It couldn't have been a more perfect day. Went to the opening of game day, went to some couple tailgates, came back, watched the McAfee kick thing, and then went into the stadium. It was a very, very interesting, great experience.
We're going to dive into all those experiences that we mutually had over the course of the last few days. And we saw a lot of you folks out and about as well in the stadium, out before and after in Bloomington. But first, before we do that, wanted to remind you all that we're part of the Back Home Network. Our friends over at the Assembly Call, they're in full swing right now talking about IU basketball. IU basketball actually has an exhibition later today against Tennessee. The Doing the Work podcast covering women's basketball, and of course here us at Crimson Cast and a bunch of other shows. All of us here at the Back Home Network, brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs.
Well, and social media shows the place to go to get pizza if you're waiting for game day.
Oh, yeah. So I was going to get into that. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I did want to say, Home Field was here in Bloomington, and we were working with them on some activations in town. They always are a hit wherever they go. They had a nice pop-up store on the east side of Memorial Stadium. They had a pop-up at Upland, which produces Hoosier Game Day Lager, which I'll talk about in just a second. And they had the 9 Windiana shirts, Scott, for sale at the Upland activation. And I guess they sold out in like 10 minutes. Like they just went boom, like gone. And that just shows you, I think, how many cool things home field's been able to deliver over the course of time, particularly for Indiana. And you look at what home field has done with Indiana apparel over the course of time. What I'm wearing right here, this was on the rack at the Indiana Memorial Union. I mean, if you're a West Virginia person, obviously they got you covered as well. Head over to homefieldapparel.com and use the code HOME23. Get 15% off of your first order. Again, homefieldapparel.com, proud sponsor of the Back Home Network and Crimson Cast. Also, a reminder, folks, this year we are being sponsored by Hoosier GameDay Lager, the easy drinking beer of Indiana football and Indiana athletics in general. It's funny, a good friend of ours, Scott, from back in the day, former IDS beat writer Sonny Amato, was at the tailgate. And, he's been listening to the podcast. And I go over, I'm chatting with him, and he's like, I hadn't had one of these before. And you're right. This can is iconic. It was great. And a great tasting beer as well. Hoosier GameDay Lager, a Vienna-style lager, which goes perfectly with tailgating, goes perfectly with watching IU football. You can get it all over Memorial Stadium. You can get it at any of Upland's locations. You can get it in any place that sells alcohol, at least pretty much. I've not checked all of the stores, but I've been told it's basically everywhere. Again, Hoosier GameDay Lager, sponsor of Crimson Cast. Please drink responsibly. Also, just a quick reminder, folks, we do have a Substack. It is free to sign up. You get podcasts delivered right to your inbox. Go do that, crimsoncast.substack.com. We do have a paid option. We occasionally have some VIP content, although I gave you 7 podcasts this week, including a live one. So there hasn't been a lot of time to do a lot of VIP stuff, but if you want to help financially support the podcast, we certainly appreciate it. It's only $5 a month, $50 a year. Again, crimsoncast.substack.com. Go check it out. We'd love to have you as one of the over 1,000 members of the Crimson Cast Substack community. All right, Scott, I think we should talk about the game first and then talk about everything around it. Indiana 8-0. And, as we were talking about a little bit before, this Indiana team has a vibe to it that is hard to really put into words. But I feel like what we saw from Indiana in this game is probably what I have learned to love the most about this particular vintage of IU football. They just don't stop. Right. And they're willing to adjust when they need to. There's a real dedication and a focus. Curt Cignetti talked about it in his post-game press conference. We've heard this talked about quite a bit. This was not a perfect game for Indiana. And if you listen to the pregame podcast that Taylor Lehman and I did on Thursday, we tried to warn you a little bit. Like this is a physical Washington team. It's a team with a lot of talent. We didn't feel like Indiana was really going to have the chance to go do what they did against Nebraska. And that's really how it played out. Indiana looked stymied, not daunted, just stymied in the first half. Offensively, really struggled. And a lot of that, as we learned later on, was because Washington essentially threw out their previous defensive tendencies and played exactly the opposite. Really tried to take away the passing game. It was a really smart game plan by Jed Fish and his staff. And Indiana really they had to find ways to survive. And they did. And the way that they survived, I think, is really telling. And Curt Cignetti talked about this in the postgame. Like, they didn't get a great game out of the passing game. The defense made mistakes. The running game took a little bit of time to get going, but they decided to focus on creating downhill running and just essentially trying to steamroll Washington. And that's what they did. In the second half, they absolutely put the game to bed as it went along. And again, we hear this talked about, I think it was Justice Ellison, but it might have been, it was Mike Kadick, talked about, again, like feeling like the opponent's will was breaking in the fourth quarter. And that has been how this team has won a lot of their games. Scott, to me, it was most gratifying that not only did they cover the spread and win comfortably, they did it in a game where they didn't have their starting quarterback. They really didn't play particularly well. And there was every distraction on the planet around them that could have taken them out of what they were doing, and yet they figured out a way to win.
Yeah, well, in that little part you mentioned Nebraska, they don't suck now. I just want to make sure I'm not getting the bad. Like, they're no longer they're a good team now, right?
I will consult with the college football intelligentsia, but I have heard that they sucked, and now they do not suck, but somehow they still suck when it comes to Indiana.
Our game still sucks, but yeah, they don't. So I'm looking forward to Washington winning a game and them suddenly being good but still sucking here. I mean, definitely you see, you and I talked about this, and I think it might have been, kind of things rolling downhill. The offense looked really good in the second half against Nebraska with Jackson. you did see the drop off here as what Curtis Rourke does bring to this team. And it's no knock on Jackson. It's just this team does run differently. You saw them kind of tightening up their playbook. I also thought, I was talking to somebody about this during the game. We were running the ball a lot. And I was saying, I think part of that is, there's a lot of RPOs where it's Jackson's call. He's making the call and he's probably making the read to run more as well. And then there were sometimes I even joke, like they would, put Jackson out with no back. It's like, all right, this is almost like Signetti being like, all right, Jackson, like there's no run option here. You are passing the ball. It was, to me, I look at the defense on this game and where the defense really stood up and helped out. They come out, Indiana Washington goes 3 and out. The place is going nuts. Indiana goes 3 and out. It's a little bit dim. I think then, Washington starts moving the ball, and then, D'Angelo Pons has that intercept, just like the ultimate interception of like, hey, I'm going to be across the line and just catch it. And then there's nobody there. I mean, it was a bizarre interception. You don't see those kind very often.
Jed Fish said in the postgame, like, he's never seen an interception on that route before. like the guy's been coaching for a long. I'd never seen it. You and I have watched a lot of football. I've never seen the play go down the way that one did. But sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I went back and rewatched it, and it's wild. Pons is there. He's kind of spying the screen route, and it's passed right to him. And then he almost like stops for a second. It's like, oh, there's nobody here. I'm just going to go the entire way. And that re-energized the crowd. And then, we got another interception along the way. The defense, I felt, especially in the first half, really energized things when it felt like the energy was starting to fall down a little bit. And it started to feel like, oh my gosh, we're going to be in a dogfight. We were in a bit of a dogfight. But to me, the defense is what really stood out to me. And for as great as this offense has been, I think that's also what's been great about this team, and I've really enjoyed with this team, is it really is great on both sides of the ball. And the defense, sometimes we talk about it, but it does sometimes get lost, as this is still a very good high-level defense, maybe not the best in the Big Ten, but it is a really good defense. And when it needs to be leaned upon, those 2 first drives, it has a pretty hardcore 3 and out, and then an interception for a touchdown. And then it really never let Washington get going. We talk about how the offense kind of strangles teams with their ability to score. The defense never let Washington have a spot. And I will say that running back number 1 for Washington, he was really elusive. Like, he was really good.
Jonah Coleman's real good.
Yeah, I mean, he's really, really good. They had him down. He kept on swirling around here and there, but they had to make, tough 4th down plays. The defense did it. So to me, I walk away thinking this defense is also good, and we can rely on both sides of the ball, even when our offense isn't clicking. The last thing I'll say is, like, you still have an offense that scored 31 points. You still won a Big Ten game by 14 points. And it was funny. There were moments in the game when you kind of, I at least in my area, I kind of heard some of the groaning, like, oh, run again. Like, come on, try something different. And I'm like, guys, have faith. Like, this, if nothing else, this is one of the few times, like, this coach has shown, have faith. Like, how we can't get this jaded this quickly with the run. Like, not every game is going to be 59-7. Like, we're not going to score every single time.
It's easy to get spoiled. I mean, look, your comments on the defense are spot on. And look, the defense wasn't perfect either. They struggled at times. And again, Signetti noted this, but even with some of the struggles they had, they made plays when they needed to. And statistically, I mean, you look at what Washington did in this game, and it was fine, but it was really kind of a mediocre performance by them when you take the whole thing in totality. When Indiana needed to get stops, they generally got those stops. And you look at the individual performances, Will Rogers, only 202 yards, had 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. They only averaged 3.7 yards a carry. Now, that's a little misleading because their top 3 backs all averaged at least 5 yards a carry, but they kept sacking Will Rogers and backing them up at key moments, and that helped a lot. Their receiving core was fine. We talked a lot before the game about how their receivers were going to be a problem, and yet, D'Angelo Pons, not the first interception, but that second interception at 5'9", going up and taking the ball away from a 6'4" receiver. That's the kind of plays where you look at it and you're like, man, that is exactly the type of athleticism and focus that this defense has been able to bring in key moments. And, look, we've had now the Northwestern game where the offense lifted the defense who was struggling that day. And then we've had this game where the defense really lifted the offense when it was struggling. And, I think on the whole, this Washington team, I mean, they're 4-4, but they look like a team that's, I mean, they probably should be playing better than they are. All the pieces are there, and it's interesting to kind of think about what their problems are in the big scheme of things. But Washington, I mean, they're a dangerous team. They'll beat somebody the rest of the way that they're not supposed to, and it'll be like, where did that come from?
Right.
In this game, though, I think the story for Indiana, as important as the defense was, it's really the offense, and the fact that even though the offense clearly had its struggles, and a lot of those were things that Washington was creating, there were also some executional issues up until the point where Indiana just decided, you know what, we're going to take our time on each of these drives. I don't know that I'm sure it's happened, Scott, but I can't remember the last time in one game Indiana had a 19-play drive, a 14-play drive, and a 12-play drive, and the 12-play drive could have kept going. It's just that the game ended. I mean, those three drives right there, the 19-play drive at the end of the first half, that was one of those where, they had a couple of good plays. There was a nice pass from Taven Jackson to Miles Cross early on in that one, but most of it was Justice Ellison. A little bit of Tyson Lawton, little plays being made by people down the stretch. They get all the way to the goal line. They end up getting stoned at the goal line. And a lot of people around me were upset. I saw some complaints on Twitter about Indiana not going for it on 4th and goal. But I'm like, this is really smart by Indiana, because it was kind of a will-breaking drive in terms of, like, it took up the entire second half of the second quarter, 7 minutes and 30 seconds. For a game where Washington was still kind of threatening and feeling like they were in it, suddenly it's a 2-score game with kicking that field goal. And we've seen Indiana go for it on 4th down a bunch. I thought it was really interesting. It's like the mindset shifted just slightly there on the coaching staff. They were like, we need to regroup. Having the 2 scores is going to be important. And it really was, because you look at what happened at the beginning of the second half. Taven Jackson throws that interception. I wasn't even back in my seats by the time the interception was thrown. They score 4 plays later. And it's like, if that's a tie game, I think it's a much different outcome, perhaps, because Washington feels like, hey, we've scaled this mountain. We survived this first half. Now we're in it and we're tied. They do all of that. Even though they had momentum at that point, they're still down by 3. And that allowed Indiana, I think, to not press on that next drive on offense. Again, take time. Again, use Justice Ellison as kind of a workhorse. And that ends up leading to the 24-14 margin that essentially salted the game away, even though we wouldn't know that until the 4th quarter.
No, I completely agree. I was looking at it slightly. I agree with everything you said. I was starting to think about it more when we went up 24-14, and just that 10-point margin feels better than 21-14, because 21-14 feels like, all right, any moment there could be another crazy pick six or Washington can score. But it felt like you had that breathing room, and you mentioned it earlier, but you saw from that 3rd quarter on, and I think that 10-point lead is what allowed this to happen. You saw Indiana just kind of slow down. Like, all right, let's just start breaking the will of Washington. And they did it. And, for a game where we feel like our offense wasn't, totally explosive and didn't, have everything, just for all the podcasts you and I have done, Justice Ellison rushed for 123 yards, averaged 4.2 yards a carry, had a long of 12, didn't have that huge breakaway, but still at 123 yards. And Tyson Lawson had 41 yards on 3.4 yards a carry. There were Crimson Cast 4 or 5 years ago, we would have been like, man, what a running back. Do we have too many running backs in the room? We have a running back explosion. Like we are, it's a little bit crazy that we've come to this point where we're looking at, 200-300 yards of total offense. And we're thinking, we're unhappy in 31 points, but Ellison is awesome. Yeah. Like he is always falling forward, even, and I think this is one of those small things that even the RPOs that don't, quote unquote, don't work, we're still getting 2 or 3 yards out of them, where in previous iterations of this in previous years, it would be a -1 or a 0 or a -2 yard loss. We're always in like 2nd and 7, 3rd and 3. And we weren't converting everything. And our offense definitely was not running as smoothly. But to me, that was the takeaway on the running side, is Ellison was awesome. And I thought it was funny, you mentioned Indiana not going for it on 4th there, but we go for it on 4th so many times. It does feel like Cignetti is making all of the right calls. And then you look over to the Washington side, they have that last drive in the 4th quarter. I think the score is at the time, let me get the drive chart, sorry. The score was, 31 to 14, and they kick a field goal. And I remember thinking at the time, like, the game's over. like we're just going to run the clock out, which we did. And even if we hadn't, given the ball back, just like, it's still a 2-score game. Like, it was a very odd call. But it did feel like a team that was playing kind of the wrong style at the wrong time. And it feels like we're aggressive. We need to be aggressive. We're conservative. We need to be conservative, because Signetti is just pushing all of the right buttons. And it ended up being a dumb field goal because Washington never got the ball back, and they didn't. I mean, I don't know if there was a path for them to win the game, but I know that path that they took was not the one to win the game.
I found it jarring that they kicked that field goal, and it felt like they were like, well, let's just try to get it close and see what happens. They weren't really trying to. I think they knew at that point it was going to be hard to make things happen in the last 6 minutes of the game. Indiana was just playing too well. 2 notes. Well, actually, just one statistical note, and then I want to talk about the quarterback situation a little bit. Yeah. So 52 rushing attempts for Indiana in this game. That is the most rushing attempts in a single game for Indiana since the 2016 bucket game, when Indiana rushed the ball 54 times. So now they've had a couple that have been close. They've had a couple of 50s. There was a 51 against Northwestern back in 2019. But you have to go back to 2016 to find a game where Indiana rushed the ball that many times. And look, I mean,
how many yards did we get in that bucket game?
Well, we rushed the ball 54 times for 152 yards. We had a 2.8 yards per carry average in that game, whereas in this game, it wasn't that much better. It was 3.62 yards a carry, but 52 carries, 188 yards. I did think that was pretty interesting. The only other thing I'll note statistically in this game is that, if you look at what Indiana did in terms of the passing game kind of played a supplementary role, or, a secondary role perhaps. But I can't help but be impressed by this. 11 passes completed. 9 receivers caught balls in this game.
Yeah.
And it was one of those games where, Elijah Surratt, who, is always open, as we know, only caught 1 ball for 12 yards. It really felt like, Washington did a good job of covering him up. Omar Cooper Jr. had a great catch for a touchdown, great run after the catch for a touchdown. Ran into one of Omar's family members in the stands before the game. We got a chance to say hi. That was great. Hopefully they're listening. But, to be able, again, we've talked about this a bunch throughout the course.
On that score by Omar, like, I don't know what happened. He did something, like, he came back and Signetti was just ripping him on the sidelines after the touchdown, to the point that someone next to me is like, man, I'm glad he scored.
Right.
I don't know what he did wrong, because it looked like he must have run the route incorrectly or missed a block the last play. But Signetti was not happy after the touchdown. He was definitely on Omar.
I mean, well, let's get some more wrong routes then, I guess, on some of these, if that's the outcome. But yeah, but the IU's ability to diversify the offense when they need to and keep finding people, even for small gains, in the passing game, is really what makes, this one of the things, at least, that makes this team so dangerous, is that it's so hard to defend when all 5 eligible receivers on a play can catch the ball. So, I think that brings us to talking a little bit about the situation at quarterback. So Taven Jackson did not have a great game.
Right.
Now, some of that, again, was Washington and the way that they played. And some of it was, I think, Jackson is still a young quarterback. We talked about how good he looked in that game, last week against Nebraska, but he was playing a Nebraska defense that had basically had its soul reaped from its body in the first half. Look, I think this game just highlighted how important Curtis Rourke is as far as the magic and the secret sauce, or whatever the heck you want to call it. And it's what we talked about in the pod before the game. Like, so much of it is reads. So much of it is being able to analyze coverage. Now, it is interesting that Signetti talked about in the post game how, Washington went from, I think, a mostly man team to a mostly zone team. And I think this is something that Indiana is going to have to face the rest of the way. Like, Indiana relies so much on those pre-snap reads, on the RPOs. When you can figure out how to confuse Indiana effectively, you're going to cause some problems for Indiana's offense. Now, does Rourke end up having that issue the same way that Jackson had the issue? I think it's a little unfair because, again, as we've talked about, Washington has a really good, a really talented roster. They obviously have a good coaching staff. Jed Fish is a good coach. They've got really intelligent guys, sons of NFL coaches as their coordinators. So I don't know if this game should be a referendum necessarily on Taven Jackson and his overall abilities as a quarterback. This was a tough game. It was a tough assignment. He could have played better. But I also think it was interesting that Indiana, rather than continually throw Taven Jackson into the fire and expect him to make plays, when they realized that it wasn't working, they tried to take the pressure off of him by routing the offense a different way. And, look, I think that as we go along, I think everybody knows that Curtis Rourke is important. I think this game just highlighted how important he is in terms of making this Indiana offense click.
No, I agree. I mean, there was a couple of plays where Jackson had guys open. I think it was second quarter. He had one guy going, to the end zone. He just overthrew him by like 15 yards. The guy was wide open. Jackson had a couple of bad throws, but I think it was less the throwing and more just like you said, the reads. I think a lot of those RPOs were plays where Rourke maybe would have pulled the ball and thrown it, but instead Jackson just kept kind of going for the RPO read and just going for the read. What was nice to see is they took some time to set it up, but they finally did, doing a reverse where Jackson kept the ball, used some of his natural speed, and they did that for a touchdown where he kind of waltzed in. It felt like they had been setting that up for a couple of times. Yeah. A couple of times, like he motioned that, but it handed the ball off the other way. So I think there are ways to use what Jackson can do, but I agree with everything you said, and that it's not so much an indictment on Taven Jackson. It's more just highlighting how important Curtis Rourke is and how effortlessly Rourke makes this offense run. Because there's nothing about Rourke where you're like, my God, he's got a cannon for an arm, or he runs around. But what he does is, really just he reads the defense very well. He has great pre-snap reads, and he has great, in-snap reads with the RPO, and he's able to go right to it. And you even saw it with Jackson kind of understanding on one of those last drives, like, oh, I can just, dink to Horton for 4 yards. I can just kind of dink and dunk and go with the guy that's open as opposed to trying to shove it into the guy who's doing the slant route for 12 yards. And that's something that Rourke has done all year, for as amazing and explosive point-wise and yard-wise as this offense has been this year. It hasn't been on gashing, 70, 80-yard plays. It's just been drives that just go on and you end up getting 90 yards maybe in 10 or 11 plays. But that's the thing, is this team doesn't have explosive plays, not in a bad way. It's just this team will just grind you down and ends up getting 400 yards over the course of an entire game. And I think that might be something Jackson, just is going to take some time to see. I hope for this team's high-level success and where we go, I hope we see Rourke sooner rather than later, though. Again, no knock on Jackson, just Rourke is really what makes the engine of this team run.
And I think it's great that even in a game where you don't get a great statistical performance out of your quarterback, you still win 31-17. Yeah. You still win by 2 scores. I mean, we keep using competence with this Indiana team. Yeah. The competence with which this team operates on offense is really special. And I think Taven Jackson's going to learn from this. He didn't blow the game. He didn't make, the only real bad mistakes he made were a couple of overthrows and then that interception.
Right.
So it's like, it's good that you've got a backup who can come in.
Interception wasn't like a horrible interception. No. It was a weird tip pass that, not great, but it wasn't like he just threw it completely to the wrong guy.
Yeah. But again, it's like to have a backup quarterback that can come in, you can win 31-17 against a talented, if maybe underachieving opponent. I mean, that's really good for the rest of the way. And we've already seen him now in a couple of games in live action situations in the Big Ten. But again, I think it does underline how important it's going to be to get Rourke back.
I know this is not normally what our podcast does, but do you think we see Rourke back? I had wondered, is this something? It doesn't sound like his thumb is broken. We don't really know what the extent of the injury is. I had wondered if Cignetti looks at this as like, can I get as much healing time as possible if I'm going to, if Cignetti thinks we can go in and beat Ohio State, which I'm starting to wonder if we can, you want as healthy a Rourke as possible. There's a calculus where you look at, could I get a home game against Washington, maybe a Michigan State team that's not quite up to par? Can I muddle my way through a couple of games with Jackson, get some wins, and give Rourke more rest time? I'm just curious what you think we're going to see, when we might see Rourke back, or how you think they're attacking this.
I will say I am impressed at the number of people that I ran into at Memorial Stadium or outside who have a person on the medical staff that told them what is wrong with Curtis Rourke's stuff. We must have a medical staff of like 9,000 people, and they all just have one friend that they talk to. And I ran into all 9,000 of those friends. But no, I think Rourke will be back for the Michigan State game. And look,
okay, you have a friend?
I have several friends. Okay, I use multiple sources. No, and I'm not making any predictions. And if I'm wrong, I will apologize. But I think we're going to see Curtis Rourke back this week, and I think you need to. And I think I remember hearing some talk about that last week. As far as, well, could you get away with not having Rourke for a couple of games? You don't want to mess around with that. I mean,
yeah,
you're going on the road to play a Michigan State team that, while not a great team, is a dangerous team with a dangerous quarterback. And I would invite anybody to look at the series history of Indiana versus Michigan State. Look at the wins and losses and tell me if you want to screw around with sending your backup quarterback up there, because you want to get your starter from 85% to 95%.
Right.
I think he'll be out there. I think it'll be fine. And I think Indiana, I think this team can win games even without great performances under center. But I think that a lot of what makes this team so hard to beat is the great performances they've been getting from under center. And look, ultimately, we'll see what happens. And ultimately, I really think that this team there's a belief, but there's also like a strategy of, let's fix things that we can fix, but let's try to do what we do regularly and make sure that we're getting into a rhythm. And I think Rourke just establishes a rhythm so much better. And look, even with the running backs having a great game, Rourke completes the picture, but he completes the picture in a way where the picture is like 3 times bigger. I guess that's how I would look at it.
No, completely.
So, only other thing I'll note, I mean, if you look at the drives, as we recite the drives here, this is what Washington did in this game: punt, interception, punt, turnover on downs, interception, touchdown, turnover on downs. That was their entire first half. That is a tremendous performance by the defense. And you look at those, there was a 3-and-out on the first one, 8-play drive where Washington was starting to threaten, and then that interception by Pons, 3-and-out on the punt, a turnover on downs after an 8-play drive again, 2 plays and an interception on the next drive. And then 5 plays and turnover on downs at the end of or close to the end of it. Not actually, it's the middle of the second quarter. It wasn't at the end of the half. In the second half, Washington goes touchdown, punt, field goal. They only had the ball 4 times in the second half because Indiana just chewed up so much clock with the drives that they had. So this is where I get excited, Scott. Like, when you're able to do that against a team that, if you go back and look at the Iowa box score, like, Washington was right in that game, and then things kind of unraveled in the second half. It was a similar story here, and Indiana did essentially what Iowa's defense did against Washington. It's exciting to watch Indiana be able to frustrate an opponent to the degree that they have the last few weeks, or the last couple of weeks, I guess. So that really does give me a higher level of excitement going into this next group of games, because they're going to need that. And they're going to be facing in these next 2 games, I think, offenses that are not awesome. You're going to need to not let those teams feel like they're getting momentum. Because as we saw, like in that Michigan State game last night, Michigan's not dead. They're really struggling, but you have to play competently. You have to play consistently. The performance the defense turned in writ large in this game, not just the drives, but also you go through and look at, 3 sacks, 6 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions. I mean, just a lot of really, really awesome things. And then the one last thing I'll say, Scott, special teams, another great game. You get that huge return from Miles Price in the latter stages of the game that really broke the game. I mean, that was really, if you want to point to one play that tipped the scale, that's probably it. Nicholas Radicic comes in, hits a field goal that was important. James Evans had a 56-yard punt, had a 44.5 yards per kick average. It was cool to watch parts of the overall play of Indiana, like special teams, chip in when it was absolutely necessary.
I also look at this as that this was kind of another way, of how to beat a team. And this is something we just haven't seen. We say this all season, things we haven't seen with Indiana football. But you look at, this was a game where they just kind of strangulated Washington's offense. The defense did and just stopped them from having chances to score. And, they barely had the ball in the second half. You look at Nebraska, it's like we blitz them and just knockout punch and then do not let them get back up off the mat. Northwestern and Maryland were similar wins where it's kind of like two cars in about the same spot. And then our offense is like, all right, we're just going to start scoring every time and good luck keeping up. And you're not going to be able to do it. UCLA was a game where it was kind of tight. And then we, again, landed a knockout blow early in the second half and then just didn't let them get, then we kind of did the same thing here. We strangulated them out. It's really cool to see this team find different ways to win and to put away opponents and not let opponents get back into games after so many years of seeing kind of the opposite of how many ways can we let opponents back into games and how can we take wins and turn them into losses. That is one thing that I'm very confident about is it really does feel that this team and this staff, they know when it's winning time and they know what needs to be done. And it's not like we're doing the same thing over and over and over again. We are doing what needs to be done in that game to put the game away. And it's wild. There's so much talk about the fact we haven't been down at all this season. We've, outscored opponents in the first quarter. What is it? A ton to zero or a ton to very little. The other thing I'll note that hasn't been talked about as much, but is also amazing. We're 8-0. We really haven't had a game that's been close to being decided in the fourth quarter. Almost every game in the fourth quarter has just been, all right, let's finish this off and let's just get one more drive and kill the clock. And we've won the game. And that to me is also pretty insane that it's we haven't had a 2-minute warning with the fourth quarter where it's like, man, if they score here, it's going to, we have to, there hasn't been anything we have to do. All we got to do is just keep running the clock in the end of these games. And that is also pretty amazing.
I mean, ultimately the Northwestern game is the one game that felt like it was getting, close in the fourth quarter, and Indiana figured out a way to win that, made a stop, scored another touchdown, and that was that. So, yeah, I think, again, when we think about this team and think about what they can do and what they have been doing and try to project ahead, there's plenty of evidence out there that says this team's going to be able to sustain what they're doing because, again, as we talked about last week, they're not winning these games because of insane individual performances. They're winning these games collectively, and that is really a very sustainable model as you head into this latter portion of the schedule. And, again, I would love to, I'll always be curious what Indiana would have done in this game with Curtis Rourke. But I think this was a good medicine for Indiana to take because I think they realized that this isn't all going to be like that Nebraska game. They got that out of their system and they figured out a way to win in a game where things could have gone wrong. Things could have gone differently. Even when things weren't going well, Indiana figured out how to do it. Anyway, S&P Plus rankings just came out, Scott, and Indiana's still 13th in S&P Plus, 15th in the country in terms of offense, 21st in terms of defense, 13th in terms of special teams. They're a really solid team, and it's interesting because most of the teams above them, take Texas and Ohio State and Ole Miss weirdly off the board in terms of, their S&P Plus rankings are kind of built on having top 10 level things happening. But a lot of the teams that are immediately between Indiana and those top three, they have one really stellar thing going on. Like Miami's got the number one offense in the country, but only the 31st ranked defense. Tennessee's got the 4th ranked defense, but only the 23rd best offense. I really like how consistent Indiana is across the board. And I'm really curious to see how that travels into the month of November.
Yeah, no, it's like the teams we look at in basketball that make the Final Four. I mean, honestly, it's the teams that are solid across all of that. And I don't know if we want to talk ahead now, but now you enter. This is the. I mean, God, it's wild. We're 8-0. I know. So there's no. I was listening to your pod with Ben, and you said something about how of course this is easily one of the best seasons just statistically. Like there aren't a lot of seasons we've had as many wins. So yes, this is one of the best 5 or 6 seasons. We're heading into territory. There's only been 67 and 45 are the only years where we've won 9 games. So we win on Saturday just off of wins. This is the 3rd best year we've ever seen in Indiana football. If we beat Michigan, it's like, are we talking the best? I mean, and it's tough because you have a Rose Bowl in there, so don't know. But this is where, this has been a great story. This has been awesome. There's nothing that happens from here on out that turns this into a ruined season. But this is the point of the story where now you can start taking steps that I think Zach Osterman said it in your pod too. Like, it goes from, kind of an unreal story to something that you've never seen before in college football. That if this team can get to 9-0, 10-0, you're doing something that is really extraordinary. And we're at that precipice of being able to do that.
Here's the thing. What the win against Nebraska did was made this. Let me do some math real quick, Scott. We need math doing music, I think, on the podcast at this point. What is that? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Winning against Nebraska became only the 13th time in program history that IU had 7 or more wins in a season. The winning against Washington has now elevated it to where Indiana's only won 8 games in the following seasons. In 1905, they were 8-1-1. In 1945, they were 9-0-1. In 1967, they were 9-2. In 1979, they were 8-4. In 87, they were 8-4. In 88, they were 8-3-1. In 93, they were 8-4. And in 2019, they were 8-5. That is the total of 8-win seasons that Indiana has had in its history.
Yeah, but that 1905 season, their schedule was soft. I mean, they were playing.
It was quite literally.
Sorry.
It was quite literally soft.
What's our S&P number from 1901? Let's look at that.
It was not a good schedule at all. I mean, Indiana in that year played, among others.
You're gonna do it?
No. Yeah, this is great. Of their wins that year, one of them was against a team of Indiana alumni. One of them was against Butler, who, not quite on the same level. One of them was against Kentucky State College. And one of them, I believe, was against Washington University. Not the University of Washington, but Washington University in St. Louis, which last I checked gave up on athletics, I think, a while ago. So you can really toss that one out. That one we probably shouldn't even count. So we're already in rarefied air with this season. Winning against Michigan State and getting to 9-0, as far as regular seasons go, that becomes immediately one of the top 3 seasons in the history of the program. And if you can win Michigan State and win against Michigan at 10-0, you are in the greatest season, at least from a regular season perspective, that the program's ever had. I mean, that's where Indiana's at right now, and that is wild to think about. But that's the way that this team has played. They've played like that. This is, Zach Osterman in his piece today had a really nice, thought about, like, this is a team that's going to warrant the same kind of alumni return that the Holiday Bowl team got prior to the game, where they got to reunite with Lee Corso. People forget that was Indiana's first bowl win in 1979. That was their first one. And at the time, Indiana just, had not had much success, period. I mean, all those seasons I rattled off, 8 wins at that point was still shocking. But this team, the way that it's playing, and whatever happens here over the next 4 games of the regular season, this team has already established one of the greatest seasons in IU history. And this is a season everybody's going to remember in the program, around the program. They have cut such a new path. And again, as we've talked about, they've done it in a way that is so endearing, because it's really like the effort, the energy, and the focus that we've seen build game after game with this team. It's a group that not a lot of people knew about. There were so many transfers. There were very few holdovers. There were a few names that we knew. We knew Omar Cooper. We knew Mike Kadick because he was a big story about whether he was going to leave or come back in the offseason. But then there were a bunch of faces that really no IU fan had paid attention to.
Including the coach.
Including the coach and including the assistants. And for this team across the board to coalesce and put this type of a season together, as you said, it's already a special season. It can only get more special from here. And I, for one, am quite fascinated to see what they do over these next few games, because, they're going to be favored. They are favored. They're a 7-point favorite against Michigan State. And statistically, they have about the same level of projected success in this upcoming game that they had in the game versus Washington. It's about 80. I think it's like 84%, according to FPI. A lot of it's going to depend on what happens with Curtis Work, obviously, but to have that and then the Michigan game at home on November 9th, man, this is set up. If things go right, this could be like, I don't even know what that 2 weeks would be like after that Michigan game, but the Michigan State game comes first, and this is a tricky one for Indiana. Indiana's played so much better than Michigan State on the balance throughout the course of the season. But this is another one of those ghosts you got to slay, because Michigan State has always had the upper hand on Indiana in football. Like this is the old brass platoon records are really, really not enjoyable. And the wins in East Lansing are rare. I mean, even in that 2019 season, which was a great season by all accounts, Indiana went into Michigan State and lost that game. People forget that. Like that was kind of the last loss before they really pulled it together in October. So it's just great how this is set up for Indiana. And the fact that Indiana managed to come out and figure out a way to win in this game, despite everything that was going on this week that could have distracted them from doing it, just makes this team even more special. You know, we keep waiting for the letdown. Maybe this was the letdown, Scott. Maybe this was the letdown.
Well, and the thing you talk about how special the season is, just something to talk about at this moment, October 27th. You know, I don't think we're going to lose out. We can talk about how we think the rest of the season's going to go. There could be a stumble here and there. We all kind of are concerned about the Ohio State game. I have a hard time seeing us losing 4 in a row. But I would say this: we're kind of at a wild point in history where this team really has 2 paths to go from here on out. One is, they go 3-1 and they're probably in the college football playoff, which is nuts. The other is, they maybe they go 2-2 or 1-3, or, they don't go to those heights. Even if that happens, we're still going to probably the best bowl we've ever been to outside of the Rose Bowl in '67. Like that's just where we're at right now. There is, the team that went to remember we went to the Gator Bowl. You and I mean, we went, but we were going to the Gator Bowl. You and I were both like, holy crap, this is a real bowl that we've heard of, that I've seen on TV. That team won 7 games that year. 8 games that year. So, I mean, they are at the same level that we were when we went to the Gator Bowl. Like we are at rarefied territory right now, even if nothing else happens. And this team has shown no reason why it would lose out. So that's what I think is really, really cool, is that we're all kind of dreaming of college football playoff, which would be unbelievable. But even if we don't get there, we're going to be in the best bowl we've ever been in. Yeah. And that's a wild point to be at. But I'm with you. Now comes the point where you can get things done that make this season even better. And I'm with you. I would not be taking Michigan State for granted. They have a freshman quarterback though, and we did very well against a freshman quarterback against Nebraska. So I think we're going to do well. But you said we haven't played well there. This will be probably the toughest road environment that we're going to play. You and I were both at UCLA, the Rose Bowl. It was.
You mean up to this point?
Up to this point, yeah.
Okay.
What did I say?
I was just like, you're dissing the horseshoe, because Michigan State's actually be the toughest place we play.
Up to this point. I don't know, man. Is Columbus tough? I don't know where it is. Do they have fans? Are they still playing? Yeah. Up to this point, because we were both at UCLA in the Rose Bowl, and it was, way more UCLA fans, but kind of antiseptic. Like, wasn't really a raucous environment. And Northwestern, you were there. It's a lot of IU fans, not exactly a normal environment. This is going to be probably the first real Big Ten type road environment. And it's a Michigan State team that is not, as dead as I think many people thought they would be after this stretch of games. They just played Michigan well. So that fan base will be excited. And, we're coming in now, we're a scalp to get. That's something that has changed throughout this year, is this win would drastically change Michigan State's season if they could just knock off, again, it's going to be funny. I don't want us to lose that game, but we lose that game. Suddenly, then we're going to be a hell of a team. Like, holy crap, we just beat a top 10 team. Like, the team that sucks, that has played nobody, that is just, complete flash in the pan. When somebody beats us, it's going to be, oh, we just beat it. They might tear the goalpost down for beating a crap team,
Yeah, I know. It's no, but look, ultimately for IU, they still haven't trailed at all.
I almost want to break that seal. Like, we were playing Washington, they had the ball first. I was kind of like, just get a field goal. Let's get that out of the way.
No, what are you talking about? Why would you want that? That's one of the best stats of the year. The fact that IU has not trailed. I mean, and there was actually there was a tweet I saw. I think it was from David Hale. I want to make sure I get the wording on this correct, but I saw this earlier on. Indiana hasn't trailed at any point this season, not a single snap. And I'm looking for the tweet now. This is called stretching in the business. Here it is. Indiana is the first FBS team to start 8-0 without trailing at any point in a game in at least 20 years. That is via ESPN stats and info. And that is nuts. And, of course, people jump in the comments like, well, they haven't played anybody. And again, it's like they did that with their backup quarterback today.
Right.
They did it in a game that was, I mean, Washington has clearly got the ability to do some things offensively. It is really remarkable. Jet Garrett from the Hoosier Network had this tweet earlier. Indiana this season has outscored opponents by 259 points. Ohio State's only outscored opponents by 201 points. I mean, so much about what this team has done over the course of the season points to they're going to take this seriously. They're going to figure out ways to do it. I'm excited to see what
is also not even just a weird fluke, because I was thinking about this, the game yesterday. Washington got the ball first, and they actually had 2 shots at it. It would be something else too if it would still be a cool stat, but if like Indiana had won every coin flip and had somehow scored a point on every single first drive, then you're like, all right, well, this is a little more fluky than not, but you'd still be 8-0. But this is where we've had time. Washington had the ball twice. They had 2 shots to get scores, and they didn't.
Yeah. So Indiana's playing at 3:30 on Saturday.
Got picked up,
all
right.
And it's on Peacock only. It's only on Peacock. So Scott, yeah, they're milking as much as they can for the streaming services here. It sucks to some degree because the one thing, it doesn't really matter where you play, but the one thing I'll say is Indiana has
the best time slots. We just haven't gotten the best time slots this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Indiana is still not the draw from an eyeballs perspective. And that's really what it comes down to. And look, that's how this goes. I mean, Indiana is still figuring out how to love football based upon what's happened this year. I think I heard somewhere Indiana was like the 5th pick for the draft of broadcasts. And for those who don't know how this works, like 2 weeks out, all the networks go in and they draft who they want. And that ends up determining what gets on like what goes on Big Noon, what goes in the 7:30 slot on NBC. It sucks that this game's only on Peacock, but I'll say that from the standpoint of what you'd like to see from Indiana, it doesn't matter because their stats have done so much of the talking throughout the course of the year. It'd be one thing if this was earlier in the year and if Indiana went in and got a signature win and not a whole lot of people got to see it, it wouldn't resonate that much. What bothers me is like, the key with all of this is ultimately Indiana is going to need to impress the committee as we move forward with everything. They need to continue to be visible to the committee. It's tough having a game like this kind of hidden on a streaming service, but we'll see how things go. And obviously from Indiana's perspective, it doesn't matter what network you're playing on. They just need to go out and win the game.
Yep, I agree.
So let's talk a little bit about the surroundings from this past weekend as we wrap up. I mean, what an amazing circumstance at Memorial Stadium. Back-to-back weeks. And, it's to me, it's one of those things that I said over and over again to people that I saw. And I had so many random people that listened to the podcast, people I'd never met before, but recognized me from one thing or another, coming up to me and saying some variation of what I was saying, which was, I never thought I would see this at Indiana. I never thought I would see, the game day thing was nuts on so many levels. I got a text from one of my students that his friend had started, he was first in line camping at 11 a.m. on Friday. And, I ended up making 2 separate food runs for the line. I brought some bagels up there at about 4:00 in the afternoon on Friday. And then had one of my favorite moments ever as an IU fan and podcaster where myself, Griffin Gonzalez, who's of course the field reporter, the field mic guy for Memorial Stadium, Connor Hitchcock from Homefield Apparel, Alex Paul from Hoosiers Connect, the marketing guy from Homefield was there as well. We ended up delivering pizzas on 2 different occasions after dark to the folks in line. It was really special. And, the kids that were out there were jacked up. They were excited. And they had to let everybody in. They were supposed to, like, those kids were camped out all night in a line that stretched from the entrance to game day all the way down to Fee Lane. And eventually, I guess they had to let everybody into the pit an hour and a half early because things were too crazy. I don't know how this resonates in terms of what exactly a great game day consists of or how ESPN views it, but this looked like an absolute party from the get-go. I got set up. I was in line to pull into the parking lot to get my tailgate set up at 5:50, and I set up, walked over at about 6:45, 7 o'clock, and I was like, wow, this thing is already absolutely jazzed. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger. You could hear the crowd from where I'm at in lot 12. Like, it was a long way away, and you could hear the cheers. It just felt like Indiana absolutely embraced the moment, and that was really what I wanted to see. And the kids that were there had a great time. The adults that were there had a great time. Ran into Coach Tonsoni. We got a chance to chat for a little bit. He was really loving the proceedings. And Scott, I mean, I didn't think I would ever see something like that in Bloomington, and yet we did. And I think Indiana passed whatever test that they had to take there with flying colors in terms of how the campus looked, how engaged the students were, how crazy that atmosphere was. It was a great advertisement, not just for the program, but really for Indiana University as a whole.
Agreed. No, I went with my son. We walked around there a couple times. We were there when the show started. It was just it was a fun, excited, and positive atmosphere, which I thought was cool. And I've not been to game day before, but you see some of the places where people are just like, there's almost like vitriol against the team they're playing. It was a lot of just kind of positive, like, hey, we're really happy you're here. Not a lot of like, F Washington, or like people weren't going the other way. It seemed very awesome. And we ended up going over and catching the walk, which was fantastic. Bumped into Reed, a fan of the show who has super nice things to say about both of us, ends up realizing he's like sitting across the aisle from me. So his seats are like he was like, love the show. I love talking to anybody who listens. And then after the first, he's kind of saying like, oh, dude, like there he is, like across the aisle. And then we start like every touchdown, we're like looking at each other like, oh my God. So Reed, thank you, man. It's good. I'll be seeing you multiple games moving forward. My only thing, it looked fantastic on TV with the stadium behind it. It did feel, we talked about this at one point if game day ever came. I think this was one of our podcasts years ago. Where would you place it? I do wonder if that was the best place to put it, just from it felt very small and contained. Like you didn't feel like it just went on forever. Although on TV, it looked better. They did a great job of framing how busy it looked. When you were there, I was kind of like, man, it's like, I'm pretty close to the stage. Like, I didn't think I'd be able to get this close. So that's the only thing I wonder is, was there a better place to put it? But I don't think there is, because everywhere else you put it, you'd be affecting parking lots where people are, or you'd be just so far away from the stadium, it wouldn't make any sense. So I think that's probably the logical place. But on TV, it looks awesome. And that shot of Memorial Stadium looked just fantastic. And I really liked I'm not sure how often they do this, but even, Kirk Herbstreit mentioned on the broadcast, like they put them making their picks on the Jumbotron. The IU comes out, they do the whole pregame hype video, which, by the way, turn the volume up on that. Like the crowd's ready to go. The volume on the hype video needs to go up. They're playing AC/DC, turn all that music up a little bit. The team comes out, and then they start showing the picks, and then Herbstreit's like about to pick Washington. He's like, oh, I didn't know I was on the Jumbotron. I guess I'll go Washington. Everyone's like, bah! It's like, I don't know if they do that often, but that was a really, really cool little touch. And then, of course, Schwarber picks, McAfee picks, and then, Corso picks, and that was awesome. And you also see, just as, you're a professional, teacher of broadcasting, but as people who do this, you see, it's just a total side note, but in the points of game day, seeing him there and then seeing him make his picks, you can think what you want about McAfee. You definitely see the charisma that he has and his ability to interact with the crowd, and the way that he engages people is just, it is singular. It is unique. Yeah. And, when he opened it up, if you watch the broadcast, he's like, in the great state of, and people just scream Indiana. Like he knows how to do the callback stuff. Like he was fantastic at engaging people. Like I was really close when they did the field goal kicking, me and my son, and it's great. He's just like, man, you're gonna have a great life, but you suck at kicking. It's just like, he's funny, he's engaging. I mean, you do see why he's getting paid what he is from ESPN, because he helps engage that show as well. And you definitely saw it, in all the aspects of where he was in game day.
It is an amazing turnaround for Pat McAfee to have so fully embraced not just the state of Indiana, but specifically IU football. I mean, remember, like, this is the guy who was going on an unnamed radio show and making fun of IU football when Kevin Wilson was here. Yeah. And there were, I appreciate everything McAfee did and has done to pump up IU football and to pump up the state. I mean, it's It's just amazing, like how much the sentiment has changed over time. And he is as responsible as anybody right now in terms of keeping the spotlight on Indiana, making Indiana a cool looking thing, making Indiana a fun story. I really, I think when all this is over, I hope that we get a chance to salute McAfee in some way, because he really has turned up the volume in a positive way on IU football, and I think that's awesome.
I think he really likes Cignetti. I think after they did game day last year at JMU, I went back and rewatched that. Cignetti's electric in that interview. Like he's just great. And then I don't know if you watched game day afterwards. Did you see Cignetti?
I haven't seen a thing so far. I'm still trying to catch. I was out a lot after the game, which I'll get to in a minute. So I haven't seen. This is all be new territory for me this afternoon.
They had Cignetti on, on game day a little. They just talked to him about some stuff. Saban's asking him questions, and but they asked him, about the change at Indiana. How can you bring so many transfers in, and the culture change. I freaking love Cignetti. He's just great. He's like, well, when I got, the team that I got when I got here, they're not playing here anymore. They're gone. It's like, so we brought in new guys, just like so flippant. Like, what's it like bringing a new team? And it's like, well, when I got here, the team that's here, they're not here anymore. They're gone playing somewhere else. And it's just like, he's so direct, funny, and he's like both comfortable and uncomfortable. And I will say, we were there for the walk. The whole team walks by. Cignetti walks by. He's so focused. I mean, again, it's a dude walking into a stadium. It's not the end of, it's not the end all be all, but he's like so focused, but has almost like a Cheshire cat smile, like just a wry little look of like, we're going in to kick some ass. And he is such a great embodiment of our team. And I love having him as my coach.
I mean, and look, his comments after the game to Rhett Lewis in the post-game interview, it's like this.
You are what your schedule says, or you are what your record says.
But it was also like, it's like, it's not going to be a lot of fun watching the tape because there were a lot of mistakes. And I love, and it's what made Saban such a unique figure in the history of college football. It's that focus on details. It's that focus on doing things right. And, when people compare Cignetti to Bob Knight, there's a lot of reasons why they don't compare in terms of personality. There's a little of the no-nonsense stuff, but where I see the biggest comparisons, if you want to do that, I'm not the one making the comparisons tonight. That's other people. But if you were going to make it, people forget, like, what's Knight's probably most famous coaching quote? Victory favors the team that makes the fewest mistakes.
Right.
And it is such a, I can't even put into words how unusual it is for Indiana football to be the team making the fewest mistakes. This is the thing ultimately that is hard to get your head wrapped around if you followed Indiana football for as long as you and I have, and as long as many of the folks that are in the audience have. Watching an Indiana team that is focused on trying to be perfect, and they'll never get there because nobody gets there in football, but to be able to reflect and say, we didn't play a great game, and that's what got to be our focus. We've got to keep our eye on it. I think it's really fascinating. We heard Cignetti talk about it a couple of times, I think both in the post game, we heard it earlier in the week. It's like he's seen teams lose their focus over and over and over again in his college coaching career. And I think we've all seen it at various times. It's why we were worried about coming into this Washington game, because there was so much going on. It's why I'd be worried going into Michigan State, but less so, because it's a lot easier, I think, to focus coming off of a game where you made mistakes and still won than it is to try to focus after you've beaten a team 56-7 and you got college game day coming to campus.
Well,
so
and that's the thing, you talk about focus. This is back, you're coming off of a bye week with, big noon kickoff, and you look very focused, kick the shit out of Nebraska, and then you have, you get your flowers, and you have a whole week of game day coming in, and you still, you make mistakes, but you're still able to plow through and beat Washington handily by 2 touchdowns. They've shown that they're not going to come in unfocused. They're not. I would be shocked to see this team lay a complete dud. They could get beat, but not lay a dud. The last game day story, I'm sure you'll see as you watch, but for anybody who didn't get to watch, there's also they're doing this roundtable talk, and Saban was just talking about how Cignetti had an air of confidence, unlike a lot of other coaches. And I love the stories that also give you a weird info into how things work that you don't know. So Saban's like, the first year after Alabama, his guy get a call from Kent State because they have an opening, and they just called and asked, who should we hire? Like, who on your staff should we hire? It's like a weird like, I didn't know Kent State, like, I didn't know colleges would be like, hey, Saban, give us somebody. So Saban just goes to the staff. He's like, Kent State's got an opening. Who wants it? And he's like, this is Signetti's first year. He's like a recruiting coordinator. Signetti's like, I'll take it. Everybody's like laughing. So he's like, no, I want to be a head coach. And Saban's like, all right, man, no, we're not. He's like, Saban's like, I always remember that. It's like, who the hell is this guy? That's like, that's not your job to take. But it was also an interesting story. Like, I didn't realize teams would just call up Saban and be like, hey, we have an opening. Give us one of your people. We don't care which one. And
again, there's a Knight comparison with Saban, because athletic directors in the 80s would do that with Knight. You know, they'd call like, which assistant of yours should we hire?
Right.
You know, that stuff does happen. You have to get into pretty rarefied air for that to be happening, though. Right. So other notes, I guess, from the overall experience, it was just so fun. Such a great vibe around the stadium yesterday. It was not the same as Nebraska with homecoming and everybody just being jammed in there. It was different. But it was a little chiller. And it was largely because I think people keep walking back and forth. Like, very few people stayed in one spot. Like, you went to game day for a while. You went to the walk. I was thinking as I was making one of my walks back, though, I was like, this is really cool. Like, the fact that there's so much going on around the stadium and everybody's getting a chance to enjoy it. The people that got there early, I mean, we had a smaller group that was there at 6 a.m. to join us for the 6-hour-long tailgate that we ended up doing. But it was great. You know, just to have those people out there. We had to get some fires going for the first time. Like, the temperature was fine when I left the house. It was like 52, 53. By 7:30 or 8 o'clock, it's like, that's got chilly. It was 45 degrees. You know, so we busted out the Solo stove, got some flames going. It was good. I was really impressed with the students, many of whom camped out all night, had to absolutely exhaust themselves screaming at game day. And then they came in and absolutely just blew the noise meter out. They were so loud. They were so engaged. And man, I tell you, let's give Jeremy Gray in the athletic department a lot of credit. The towel thing was frightening and awesome at the same time. And I mean, that opening when everybody's waving the towels, I've seen so many videos of it. I mean, that will be video that we will see for decades when you look at, like, putting together the images of IU football and IU athletics. And it added another layer to what has already become a really, really exciting and intimate but very loud environment in Memorial Stadium.
I hope they do that for all games. Like, moving forward, all Big Ten games, it's great. Signetti mentioned that on game days. Like, we got these, they showed him the towels. Yeah, we got those. We got a couple more. Like, we got one for every game. Like, so he knows. Like, he knows what's going on. Yeah. He's like, we got other ones. Like, so there was going to be fun towels, I think, for Michigan and Purdue. I think they're all going to say something different. It was awesome. It was the people around me like, this is what big time college football is like. And I had a woman behind me who's had been a season ticket holder for like 45 years. Like, I've never seen this. I've never experienced this. It was goosebump worthy. It was awesome. The towels stayed. I've been at a lot of, NBA playoff games. They have towels. And like by the third quarter, it's like nobody knows you had towels anymore. The students kept using the towels. It was such a cool look, such a cool vibe. It was cool seeing, Michigan at night. In the game, they have their stupid pom-poms. It's like, we have a thing. We have a college football thing that other college football programs have. No, it was awesome. And I do, I see it. And I think you said this in a couple podcasts ago. It's not so much that it's going to freak out Washington, who's been to a national championship game, who's heard noise, who's won big games. We play Michigan in 2 weeks. It's not like they're like, oh my God, we're blowing the doors off like Assembly Hall can in basketball. But what I think it does is it energizes our team. And you see it, you see when, after that first defensive stand, the defense is just jacked up going to the fans. And, it really energizes our team, which is what we need. And it's awesome. And I mean, tickets are sold out. And I was also, thinking about this. They had ads for, renewing your season tickets or getting 2025 season tickets. And this is, it's kind of a no-duh moment, but this is why it's so important. Because I remember last year, you had the dud of a season, the season ends, you lose to Purdue, and it's just like, oh God, we lost to Purdue last year, right? I'm just doing off the top of my head.
You did lose to Purdue, yes. You didn't fever dream that.
Yeah. It's like, and then I remember like a couple days later, you get the email like, hey, football tickets are around. Like, we have season tickets for next year. And it's like, I want to not think about football for 9 months, but that's a moment where if you're there, it's like, I had to buy tickets on StubHub. You hear someone had to buy it on StubHub. It's like, man, I want to get season tickets next year. This is the time you advertise for next year's season tickets, and it's all great. But I'm with you. It was an electric environment. The team coming out is awesome now. Again, just go back to, you need something between the third and the fourth quarter. They need to find something to do or some song to sing or something, because it's kind of a dull period.
We'll get the committee on that and work on that. We got a week or 2 weeks really before we got to come up with something. I'm sure we'll figure it out. Only other things I wanted to say. I mean, it was just so great seeing so many people. Really the whole weekend. I mean, we saw some people out Thursday night, some alums back in town, people that wanted to kind of catch a piece of the action. We saw the ESPN crew out at Upstairs Pub that night, which was cool to see. Stanford Steve was there for quite a while. Reese Davis was there, the whole production staff. Friday, we had that awesome live podcast at the Upstairs Pub. That was really special. We've done some live podcasts before. We've had some varying levels of success from an audio perspective, but a huge shout out to DJ Unique and the whole group over at Upstairs Pub for making that happen. It was really special. And a lot of people came out, watched the show. Some people found out about the show. They were just having drinks, and it's like, who are these people talking? But really great job by Joe Cronin, really great job by Griffin Gonzalez jumping in and talking through some IU football stuff. And then just the whole rest of the night, the home field activation at Upland was awesome. And then all of the people that came up to me, and I know they've done the same with you, before the game, in the stadium, after the game. I was out at Kilroy's, which I do not normally do, but I'm used to people our age watching the podcast.
Right.
And saying hi and so on and so forth. I'm not used to students watching the podcast, but I think we had 20 or 30 students or recent alums who watched the podcast who said hi. It was really special to meet all you folks in person. And I love the excitement. I love the passion people are suddenly developing for IU football. I really appreciate those of you who have shouted us out on X or some other places.
I'm so happy for you guys.
Happy for you guys. And look, I mean, it's absolutely positively not about us. I mean, this is about the fan base in general. It's about the football team. It's about all the people in the athletic department. I mean, this is one of those seasons that, this is, for me, it's most important that they experience these things, because look, what you and I have done over the years is we've talked about this stuff, and it hasn't always been easy. And to be able to share the joy, the optimism, but also to be able to talk seriously about the team and be able to, draw attention to things that need to be fixed, but also to be able to tip our caps to players and coaches who are doing amazing things out there, and to have all you folks out there in the audience not just share that with us, but feel comfortable to come up and say hi, which I'm glad you did. I was walking down Kirkwood on Friday, and one of our I've lost the tweet. I don't know where the tweet went, but one of our listeners, I've got my AirPods in and I'm walking down. He stops his car at Kirkwood and Grant, rolls the window down. I look over, I pause the music I was listening to. He holds his phone and he's like, "I'm listening to the show right now." Just great, great stuff. Great,
awesome.
So that's been happening a lot. And I am just glad that we've been able to act as kind of unofficial ambassadors for IU football. Hasn't always been the greatest job in the past, but man, it is so fun right now. And it's so fun seeing people out after a win, having a good time, talking about football.
Yeah.
We were, met some Washington Huskies fans out on the deck at Roy's last night. And we had a nice 10-minute convo about Penix and DeBoer and the whole thing last year. And they were really impressed with the team. They were really impressed with the stadium. It's always great when you get those little stamps of approval from programs that have had a lot of success with football, like Washington has recently. But really, the biggest level of excitement is meeting you folks out there and getting a chance to talk with you all, and the fact that you find the show to be somewhat useful in terms of being a part of your fandom. That really does mean a lot.
Two more things on that. I agree wholeheartedly. I love to hear it. It always amazes me. People are like, "I love listening to you guys." Like, it's great. I appreciate it. It's nice to have outlets to listen about IU football. It's also cool. I brought my buddy Matt, who oddly grew up in Bloomington and didn't go to a lot of games. I hadn't been to a game in years, and he's like, "That was a great experience." It's really cool to have an IU football experience where I feel like you can share it with others now and not have to caveat it with, well, this and that. And, it's like, just, hey, go enjoy it. Like, We're going to go for 3 hours for the game. We're going to walk around. We're going to go to the game. We're going to have a hell of a time.
Yep.
And it really is that environment now. And you couldn't have asked for better weather. You also mentioned something. One of your other pods, you had a lot of pregame pods, what I appreciate. I love all the pods. One that he said something about how people, there's been a little chatter about, well, where could you expand Memorial Stadium, which is bananas. And I laughed. But then there was a lot of overhead shots during game day of the stadium. And I'm sitting there watching. I'm like, where would I expand the stadium? It's bananas to think. I think what I would do is over the north end zone. I think you could put another round of seating like above the student section that's there now. That kind of granite podium or whatever is behind the end zone. Like there's almost a spot there where you could rest. Another like I would think that maybe you go second tier, kind of like Penn State has in their end zone. I know this is an absolutely ridiculously stupid conversation, but I was thinking, you do look at Memorial Stadium and you kind of see, all right, if this is real and we keep doing this, there's room to, the stadium has spots where you could expand another 20, 30,000 and still make it look normal. I think that's where I would do it.
See, I think if you were going to expand the stadium, let's fever dream about stadium expansion. Okay. If you were going to expand the stadium, I think the only place that makes perfect sense is to put a second deck on the east side. And here's why. Okay. I can remember the few times Indiana football would be on national television when I was growing up. The shot that every single director decided they wanted to get was the shot from the top of Memorial Stadium on the press box side, which is the west side, shooting across with Assembly Hall like hovering over it like a gray eminence. And it's always, and the narrative from the broadcasters was always something along the lines of Memorial Stadium, literally and figuratively in the shadow of Assembly Hall and Bob Knight. And that, like, to me, I would love to get to a point if we just say we can't see Assembly Hall from inside the stands. Like, it's a separate, and that's no disrespect to basketball at all, but that kind of would feel like the logical molting of Memorial Stadium into the butterfly that it is becoming, where you can be like, we're not going to look at the basketball arena anymore. This is its own self-contained thing.
Okay.
I will say where we really need to, and this is where someone needs to donate $50 million. We got to get a new
Substack subscription. We're going to donate $50 million, buy our Substack, but yeah, go VIP.
Got to get a new press box in luxury suites area. I mean, that press box, I always, for those of you who are of a certain age, Armstrong Stadium used to have a huge, like, rickety wooden press box on, I guess that would be the north side of the stadium. And I remember broadcasting a little 500 from that press box my junior year. You and I broadcasted soccer there. That thing always felt like it was both going to collapse and burn down simultaneously. And I always remember what it looks like. And I can't ever look at our press box and suites area in Memorial Stadium without thinking about that particular edifice. And so,
well, the weird thing with our press box, we haven't been up there. You and I have both been there calling games. It hasn't changed. And I've been up there a couple other times for some suites. It's wild how, not big Memorial Stadium is. It's not, Penn State or Michigan. It's still a relatively, mid-sized stadium. You are so far up there. You get up there and you're like, Jesus, I didn't realize Memorial Stadium was this high. You feel so far away. It's bananas how far away you are.
I mean, there's no experience quite like going up to the broadcaster level at the very top, like on the roof, and you're like, you know what? I'm good. I don't really need to call this game after all. It is a long way up there. So there's a lot of things that could be done. I will say I think the stadium is a really good size. It's intimate. It's loud. When there's people in there that are cheering on Indiana football, it'd be great to do some additional renovations. Because I think revenue-wise, you need to be able to generate more revenue. You just want to be careful that you're not over expanding, because we're in an era where people go to things less and less live. It's been great to see so many people choosing to go out and watch Indiana football in person. Let's do that for a few years. Then we'll re-up the conversation at that point. So
get the $50 million donor.
Anyway, for this upcoming week, we'll have additional content coming.
You going? Is the Galen streak going to continue?
Oh, I'm going to be there.
All right.
I'm going to be there. Don't worry. I'm heading up to East Lansing. So in advance of that, we'll have our regular outline of content this week. We'll have Bison Chat coming up Tuesday night, I think. We've got a little bit of a time issue there. We may have to push it to a later night show. So just keep an eye on X, or keep an eye on the YouTube channel if you subscribe to the Back Home Network YouTube channel. you'll see when we're going to do the show. It'll probably be on the later end of things on Tuesday night.
Because we always do this on Sunday mornings, where do you think this is a fun new game that we never get to play? Rank the Hoosiers. Where do you think our ranking goes to after this win?
See, I don't think it's going to change that much. I think we're going to end up being ranked probably 11th, maybe 12th.
Yeah.
I don't see it being one of those things where IU jumps a bunch of teams. It is interesting if you look at the FPI projections now. Indiana is 11th in FPI. They are now projected officially to go 11-1. They have an 8.5% chance of winning out. They have a 68% chance of making the playoff, and they have a 16% chance essentially of winning the conference. And that doesn't sound like great odds, but I'll note that Ohio State right now only has a 24.5% chance of winning the conference and only a 72% chance of making the playoff. So Indiana's playoff odds are actually only, 4 percentage points less right now than Ohio State's. So, if you look at what happened in the national results, I just don't see a lot of places where voters are going to change their minds. What really drags Indiana's poll numbers down is that the number of people who vote them like 19th, 20th. I mean, you've got guys like Stephen Means at Cleveland.com who's been voting them like 5th. We're starting to see a little bit more of that. I don't know what the logic is of saying Indiana's not in the top 10 at this point, but I don't care. At this point, the results are the results, and just keep winning games. That's really all that matters is where I've landed. Because I just think, again, as we see this over and over again, like if it wasn't Indiana, if it was somebody else with this exact same resume, these exact same wins, it would be a top 5 team right now.
Yeah.
So we know that in our hearts. But we'll try to do some extra content this week. I got a couple interviews that I'm trying to get nailed down. And of course, we'll have Crimson Cash coming up on Thursday. We'll have the preview with Taylor Raymond.
You're listening. Hoosier Hot Streak hit again. We're going back.
Hoosier Hot Streak is making you money, folks. So be sure to check that out. James was able to come down. John Kaluter got him a ticket. So he was able to come down. Saw him at the tailgate. He got a chance to watch the game. So that was great to see.
You in the Hot Streak, we'll be able to pay for that $50 million renovation ourselves.
Crimson Cash, the Crimson Cash luxury suites. I love it. The Back Home Network East Stand. I like where this is headed.
Home field cannon shooting shirts out to everybody. And
Anyway, that'll any final thoughts, Scott, before we wrap up?
No, this was a fun 2-week run, even though I was only at one of the games. It was a lot of fun. I hope for the sake of the Michigan game, we both have good weather and that we come in continuing to be undefeated. Because I think that could be it feels like we continue to move the goalposts and when we're going to get recognition, but it does feel like we can go undefeated and beat Michigan. That's a point where then suddenly it's all on the table. And I think we'd get some even more national recognition. But no, it's awesome. This has been just an unbelievable ride. And it was a great weekend, a great day of football.
Yeah, I just want to win 12 games, and the only recognition I care about is from the College Football Playoff Committee. That's the only group of people I particularly care about getting recognition from at this point. So
I think we can make it. I think at this point, like that's a real goal that we should be shooting for, is getting the College Football Playoff.
What a world!
We had the discussion, like, if we host a game, it'll be December 20th. Like, do you do it in Memorial Stadium or do you move it to Lucas Oil? Because
no, have it here. What are you talking about? No. Yeah, no, we'd have it here. It'd be amazing too. What an atmosphere. But hey, lots of football to play between now and then. Let's see what Indiana does. My thanks to all you folks for tuning in. My thanks to all of you folks for coming up and saying hi throughout the course of the week. Our thanks to our friends at Home Field Apparel. Our thanks to everybody involved with the making of the show, which today was basically just you and me. But Scott, great to talk with you, and great to talk to all you folks out there. We will be back later on in the week with more Crimson Cast as we walk you through this week. Indiana 8-0. They beat Washington. They face Michigan State coming up on Saturday. For everybody involved, I'm Galen Clavia. Thanks for joining us on Crimson Cast. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Bring back the Bison. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody. Bye, YouTube.